Hi, this is Bill, and this is Progpaganda. The classic English progressive rock band Yes first achieved commercial success in the spring of 1971 with the release of their third album, the Yes Album. The Yes Album is a great record. It's the record that first introduced me to the band, and it's still a personal favorite of mine. But I would dare say that Yes truly set themselves up for long-term commercial success later in 1971 with the release of their fourth album, Fragile, issued in the UK in November of 71 and in North America in January of 1972. Fragile was an important album for Yes for two reasons. The first was that it was the first album where their guitarist, Steve Howe, was fully integrated into the band. Howe joined Yes in late 1970 and was a participant throughout the recording sessions for the Yes album, but in particular, his songwriting contributions were somewhat minimal. His biggest contribution in particular on that album, the third movement of their suite, Starship Trooper, was indeed a piece that Howe had recorded once before with his previous band. Howe contributed a bit further to the writing on Fragile, in particular collaborating with John Anderson on the album's lead-off track, Roundabout, which became a radio staple and is a song that is still regularly played in Yes concerts today, usually as the last song of the evening. But Fragile was also important for its introduction of a new player within the ranks of Yes, that of course being their keyboard player, Rick Wakeman. Yes's original keyboard player was Tony Kaye, who was a great musician in his own right. But Tony Kaye was always of the mind where he preferred making use of the piano and of the Hammond organ on selections. The various other members of Yes tried to encourage Kaye to incorporate other keyboards like the Mellotron and particularly the Moog synthesizer into his work, and he did on the Yes album make use of the Moog on a couple of songs, in particular on Yours Is No Disgrace and on Perpetual Change. But Kaye was not a big fan of these electronic instruments that could potentially break down in a concert setting and preferred the tried and true keyboards. Ultimately, the decision was made to replace Kaye in August of 1971 as rehearsals for Fragile were ending and recording sessions beginning. Rick Wakeman, who replaced Tony Kaye, was a natural for the job. He was a classically trained keyboard player who, by his late teens, was already doing sessions rather regularly in London. At the time that he joined Yes, he had completed work on a couple of albums as a member of the Strawbs, but also had done some notable sessions with Cat Stevens, Elton John, and especially with David Bowie. Wakeman appeared on several Bowie albums in 1970 and 71 and had been asked in the same time frame as Yes invited Wakeman to join Bowie's touring band, which would later become known as the Spiders from Mars. Wakeman, only 22 years old, brought that wonderful resume to the table along with considerable skill. Perhaps most importantly, he was not afraid of the new keyboards. He had made use of the Mellotron in particular to great effect on his work with Elton John and with David Bowie. The Mellotron, of course, on Space Oddity is Wakeman's work, recorded when Rick was only 20 years old. Wakeman's introduction to Yes was, by his accounts, an interesting one. Those of you who are familiar with Rick know that he is a master storyteller, and he on occasion has been known to change the contents of a story as he's told it over the years. So I know there are different versions of this story that are out there, and I apologize in advance if you think I may be over-exaggerating here, but I assure you that this is a story that I've heard from Rick's own mouth as part of a documentary on progressive rock that was recorded by the BBC back in the 1970s. Rick tells the story of his first day with Yes as one where, upon arriving to greet the band, witnessed a bit of an altercation, which actually resulted in a few swings being thrown between Bill Bruford and Chris Squire. Rick's immediate reaction to this, again, this is probably a bit for laughs, but his immediate reaction, so he said, was that, oh my goodness, this band may be breaking up. I wonder if David's filled the role with his band yet. What Rick didn't realize was that the altercations between Bill and Chris were something of a regular thing. They didn't always result in swings being thrown or fisticuffs, but the relationship between those two was always a bit on the edge. They respected each other tremendously from a musical perspective, but didn't always get along the best. Anyway, we're getting a little off the track. The other thing that happened on this particular day was a planning session that the various members of Yes got together to consider the contents of the Fragile album. The contents of the Fragile album had evolved in the band's planning over the course of several weeks in that summer of 1971. In the early stages of planning, it was thought that the band could make a double album focused mostly on studio cuts, but perhaps with a few live cuts included as well, not unlike what Pink Floyd had done about a year or so earlier. Ultimately, that idea was put to the side and planning began on a single studio album of original material. At this point in time, however, by the band's reckoning, along with input that they were being given by their co-producer and recording engineer, Eddie Offord, they were probably about 10 minutes or so short of a full album's worth of material. So the band got this meeting together to determine what their direction would be to fill that 10 minutes with material they might have on hand. Wakeman's telling of the story was that Chris Squire spoke up first, saying that he had a bass riff that he thought was fairly powerful, that he might be able to develop into the structure of a song. John Anderson apparently spoke next, saying that he had the beginnings of a song together. There were some things that he needed to iron out in order to really make it hang together properly, but he thought that that could serve as the basis, at least for the lyrics of a new piece. Bill Bruford then piped up saying that he had been working with a phrase that conceivably could be used to link a couple of sections of the song together for purposes of fleshing out the song's length. Wakeman was bemused by all of this. As a classical musician, he was used to the idea of songs being composed to a given structure: verse, chorus, middle eight, bridge. And Wakeman's reaction to all of this was, who the hell writes songs this way? This is crazy. What Wakeman probably didn't realize was that Yes was based on their experience of the Yes album, experienced in approaching their material this way. All of the longer songs on the Yes album, Yours Is No Disgrace, Starship Trooper, I've Seen All Good People, and Perpetual Change, were constructed with significant editing in the studio by Eddie Offord, and in some cases taking pieces that hadn't started out being planned to be used together in a song and pasted together in order to put together a finished whole. Yes got used to working this way to the point where on some of their later albums, including Close to the Edge and Tales from Topographic Oceans, songs weren't actually played live in their finished form by the band until all the different pieces were edited together in order to piece together the actual studio recording. But from Wakeman's perspective, this was an approach that he just was not used to. This was akin to taking a bowl of spaghetti and throwing it against the wall and seeing what stuck. In this particular case, however, the bowl of spaghetti was an interesting one. The song that came out of this planning was Yes's classic, Heart of the Sunrise. Heart of the Sunrise would officially be credited to John Anderson, Chris Squire, and Bill Bruford as composers, with the final version of the song containing all of the different song snippets that Rick Wakeman alluded to in his anecdote that I just shared. Wakeman would contribute to the songwriting process as well, but would not be credited. We'll talk about that in a moment. The total running time of the song was 10 minutes 34 seconds, with the song including 5 separate sections. One that I'll refer to as the song's overture, the song itself, an interlude that extends the song to get it to a standalone bridge, and then finally a recapitulation of the main themes of the song, ultimately leading to its close. The song's overture is by Chris Squire and includes the bass riff that Wakeman alluded to in his telling of the story of the song. Chris Squire went on record in various interviews after the song's recording saying that he took a significant inspiration for his composing this bass riff from the middle section of King Crimson's classic track, 21st Century Schizoid Man. An interesting point in particular, considering where Bill Bruford would ultimately take his career about a year or so after Heart of the Sunrise was recorded. The overture that Squire provided itself has 3 parts. The introductory portion of it, which is about 30 seconds in length, is based on the main bass riff, comprising essentially the song's main theme. The riff in the key of A-flat minor is a classic. It's one that definitely sticks in your head. And recognizing this, Squire, transitioning away from that section into the next one, stays in key, working again in A-flat minor for the overture's second section, which is a blues vamp. Over the course of this vamp, which goes for about 1 minute and 35 seconds, Squire repeats a 2-measure log phrase in A-flat minor some 27 times, but changing it up just a little bit each time and playing with a bright and somewhat dirty tone on his Rickenbacker bass. Again, this is a really memorable section of the song that sticks with the listener. 3 repetitions into the vamp, Rick Wakeman joins on Mellotron using a string section setting, and continues that for 16 repeats of the vamp when finally Steve Howe enters on guitar, bringing this section of the song to a close some 20 or so seconds later. At about 2 minutes 5 seconds in, we transition to the third section, which is basically a repeat of the first section of the overture, but it's extended now and repeated 3 times. The first 2 repeats are effectively the same in length as the first that opened the song. The third is a monster that goes double the length, with Squire playing ascending scales on his bass at the same time as Howe is playing descending scales on the guitar, and vice versa. Again, very compelling in structure. This continues until the overture completes at about 3 minutes 31 seconds in. This would have been a monster piece by itself, but obviously it's just the introduction. Heart of the Sunrise's second section is John Anderson's song contribution, and it's one of his prettier ones. It is, as pointed out earlier, a little bit unbalanced. The structure of the verses are slightly different, and one verse is considerably longer than the other. But both verses are compelling in structure, and the instrumentation, particularly Squire's bass in the background, is very, very strong. The song continues for about 3 minutes and 20 seconds. At this point, the song reaches an interlude. The interlude is composed by both Bill Bruford and Chris Squire. Bruford's contribution is a frenetic riff in E-flat minor that is somewhat reminiscent of another piece that he contributed to the Fragile session called 5% for Nothing. That piece alternates with Squire's main theme from the overture in A-flat minor. And we, in the course of the interlude, have 4 repeats of first the Bruford theme, then the Squire theme, back and forth 4 times. We get then to a fade out from the bass and keyboards in what is effectively a false ending, one of several the song has, at the 8-minute, 5-second mark. This takes us to the song's bridge, which runs about 90 seconds in length. The bridge is dramatically marked by Rick Wakeman's contribution. It's a single measure on the piano in 9/8 time, but it is so lovely and does a wonderful job of introducing a section of music and lyrics here that is somewhat disjointed from the rest of Anderson's song, but by virtue of Wakeman's introduction, really fits very well here. The song out of the bridge transitions into something of a recapitulation section where various of the themes from the song are repeated in a semi-random order, it seems. I can imagine that Eddie Offord in the studio did a fair amount of work with crossfades and with editing in order to come up with a finished product here. And I should make the point in mentioning Eddie Offord that his work as a recording engineer on the Fragile album in general and on Heart of the Sunrise in particular is wonderful. Offord's work on this album really makes it stand out. He was a terrific recording engineer working at one of the more advanced 16-track studios in London at the time, at Vision Studios, where he also produced the Yes album previously with Yes, and an album for his other big-name client, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Tarkus, at roughly around the same time in early 1971. This album would not have been what it was without Offord, not to discount the contributions from the members of Yes, but Eddie Offord was almost the 6th member of the band at this point in time. Following the recapitulations, at about 9 minutes and 30 seconds, we return to the final section of the song, which is a repeat of John Anderson's vocal theme, basically a third verse of the vocal theme, followed by an outro, which concludes the song, with Squire's bass riff now being repeated in a different key, B-flat minor, to close the song. This is a wonderful track. It probably could not have been written without all of the contributions from the 4 members of the band. Certainly Rick Wakeman made a great contribution just by virtue of his work on the bridge and probably as well coaching the band on how some of these different pieces could be fit together. And as I said, Offord's contribution as an engineer is masterful too. I mentioned that while Rick Wakeman participated in the writing of Heart of the Sunrise, that he did not receive songwriting credit for it. This sadly was because of a prior contract that Rick Wakeman had signed with A&M Records, the label that the Straubs recorded for. A&M, as part of that contract, had first publishing call on Wakeman's work through their in-house publishing company, Rondor Music, called Almo Music in the United States. Almo for the 2 owners of A&M Records, Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. At this time, Yes had a similar publishing arrangement with their label, Atlantic Records. Their publishing went through Atlantic's in-house publisher, Cotillion Music. I suspect that the challenge here was that with Wakeman having the outstanding contract with A&M, that giving him songwriting credit would have taken money away from the other members of Yes based on the contract that they had with Atlantic. And so probably a command decision was made by the band and their manager, Brian Lane, to leave Rick off of the songwriting credit. Rick Wakeman was promised that he would have the monies for the royalties for this song, as well as for another song from the Fragile Sessions that he also contributed to, South Side of the Sky. However, it would apparently not be for years before that true-up was finally done. One of the things that happens in the music business, unfortunately. Anyway, that is the story of Heart of the Sunrise. Heart of the Sunrise has been noted by various members of Yes, including at various turns by Chris Squire, Bill Bruford, and Rick Wakeman as being one of the strongest songs that the band put together during its classic period in the early and middle 70s. As a fan of the band going back to the early days, I'm inclined to agree. Hope you enjoyed this episode as always. If you're not already a subscriber to this channel, please join. Please click like, and we'll see you again soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.